When are we most likely to see a rainbow? Rainbows form when the light is bent and the colors within are revealed. And in the case of this double rainbow over the Atlantic Ocean was after a storm had swept through. I took this picture in the midst of my own storm of infertility. My story begins in 2020, and despite the challenges of the pandemic, I had successfully transitioned my career and was again stably employed. Felix, my oldest, was 3 at the time and had recently joined the ranks of the potty trained. It was time to start thinking about adding another member to our family. I found out I was pregnant just after the new year in 2021. I was so excited. Everything was fine until 8 weeks when I went to the bathroom and I wiped and there was blood. I called my midwife. She reassured me. She said if I was worried about it, we could do an ultrasound, and so we scheduled for the next week. Now, that week, we were covering the biology of miscarriage in my genetics class at the University of Colorado Boulder. So you might say that miscarriage was really on my mind. I repeated over and over to myself that everything was fine, there wasn't any more blood, I was still enjoying all that early pregnancy nausea. The ultrasound room had a big monitor up on the wall where I and my husband Kevin could see what the technicians saw. But we didn't see anything. Neither did the technician, who after looking for what felt like an eternity said, "I'm sorry, I can't find a heartbeat." I had a type of miscarriage called a missed miscarriage, when the baby passes away, but for whatever reason, the body doesn't register that and the pregnancy continues. I was told my options, and I went home to process and make a decision about how to end a wanted pregnancy. I was pregnant with my dead baby. I couldn't protect them. I couldn't save them. I felt like my body had failed me and I had failed my child. A few days later, I delivered my baby's remains at home. I read somewhere that when you lose a child, no matter the age, that you no longer see the world in color anymore. It's such a profound loss that everything looks monochromatic and dull. That's how I felt. It was like the reverse of the Wizard of Oz. Instead of entering into Oz and seeing all the beautiful colors, instead now my world was shrouded in darkness. Fast forward 9 months, I was pregnant again. I was excited. Mostly I was terrified. I went right in to see my provider. Given what happened last time, they ordered an early pregnancy ultrasound. The ultrasound confirmed that I was pregnant, but it also showed the baby was too small. Explanations were offered. Maybe I ovulated later. Sometimes it's normal not to see anything at 6 weeks. 6 weeks is still very early. So they said, come back in 2 weeks. Healthy babies usually have heartbeats at 8 weeks. At that appointment, we saw the electrical activity that precedes a heartbeat, but it wasn't a definitive heartbeat. So they said, come back next week. I did my best in that week to stay calm. I did my best to hold on to hope, even it was so hard. Consecutive losses are rare. That's what I kept telling myself. The statistics were on my side. We were starting to see a heartbeat. It was going to be okay. Back on the ultrasound table a week later, the room was absolutely silent. I could see on the screen what had happened. My baby had died again. After my second miscarriage, I had to come to terms with being a statistic in the worst possible way. No one wants to be a 2%er when it's something bad. 2%. That's the chances of having 2 missed miscarriages in a row. With my second loss, I joined the ranks of people diagnosed with recurrent pregnancy loss, which is a type of secondary infertility, all while managing such profound grief that's often unacknowledged in society. There's even a special word for it, disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is grief that's unvalidated by social norms and social customs. It includes pregnancy loss, infertility, the loss of a loved one by suicide, or other watches, like watching the decline of someone with Alzheimer's disease. With pregnancy loss being such a ubiquitous experience, it's strange to me that people grieve in silence after a loss. 1/4 of all pregnancies end in miscarriage, and even that's thought to be an underestimate. It's so common, and yet no one talks about it. Lost moms like me grieve silently and make our own little memorials, like the charms on this necklace that I had made after my second loss. So why am I sharing my story of loss today? Because by talking about it, we'll get better care and support for people experiencing loss. But we're not at that part of my story just yet. Since it is so unusual to lose 2 pregnancies at 9 weeks in a row, we opted for additional testing to see what was going on, starting with looking at the baby's remains. Wanted to check the baby's chromosomes. Often miscarriages are caused by chromosomal problems, and these problems are more frequent as people age. So was it a chromosomal problem? No, it wasn't. Our baby boy had normal chromosomes. So why did we lose him? And that question led us to a fertility specialist and the long winding path of fertility testing. Do you know what fertility testing involves a lot of? Blood. Lots and lots of blood. Oh, sure, the fertility doctor said it would be just 4 blood draws, but failed to mention that it would be at least a dozen tubes each time. Ooh, I tell you what, I made the resident vampires at the hospital so happy. And so while I was busy getting perforated, my husband had the dubious honor of producing a sperm sample while I sat in the waiting room. Very awkward. So after all this testing, what did we find out? There was some suspicious findings, but nothing. A whole lot of nothing. I got 2 more second opinions from other fertility specialists. None of the 3 doctors agreed with each other. So we looked for commonalities in the recommendations and decided to start a cocktail of antioxidants to improve egg quality for me and sperm quality for my husband. I would start taking baby aspirin and progesterone suppositories, so much fun, from ovulation. This is everything laid out on the counter, my ingredients for a rainbow. 3 months passed. I took lots and lots and lots of pills. I had to buy a pill caddy because I couldn't keep all my pills straight. My husband heroically gagged his pills down each evening. And meanwhile, I worked through my grief. I worked through my trauma with my therapist. And then it was time. We took a leap of faith and tried again. Tried for our double rainbow baby. Like a rainbow appears after a storm, rainbow babies are born after the storm of loss. The whole time holding on to that hope that this time would be different. The 2-week wait between ovulation and my period was excruciating. Every day was that tug of war between fear and hope and fear. Took my first pregnancy test at 10 days post-ovulation. The earliest we could see a result. It was negative. Tested again 3 days later. There was 2 lines. I was pregnant. Called the fertility doctor. She ordered blood tests. 2 days later, the blood test confirmed that my levels of the pregnancy hormone HCG were on the rise, which is consistent with pregnancy. 3 days later was our first hurdle we had to clear. We had to do a second blood test to see if my HCG levels had increased. They needed to double. That would mean my pregnancy was off to a good start or tell us if I was at risk of miscarrying again. My numbers tripled. Whew. Next hurdle was we had to do an early pregnancy ultrasound at 8 weeks. I bought this willow tree figurine during that excruciating wait to 8 weeks. During those weeks, every single trip to the bathroom was tinged with fear. Was there going to be blood again? Was I going to miscarry again? This little figurine is called Quiet Wonder, and the little insert that came in the box says, "May quiet wonders bring you hope." It represents my intention during those weeks to embrace that moment I had while I had it, waiting to see if the butterfly, if my pregnancy was going to stay. The day the ultrasound came, I had never received good news in an early pregnancy ultrasound. And to make things worse, I was in the same room with the same ultrasound technician where I had gotten bad news at my last ultrasound. Nervous doesn't even begin to describe how I felt walking into that room. And then she said, "I see a heartbeat." Baby's heartbeat was beating at 175, and their growth was perfectly on track. I wish I could tell you that it was easy after that, but it wasn't. Pregnancy after loss is hard. I was still waging that war between fear and hope and fear. I was still so afraid that I was going to lose this baby too. I debated taking the tags off of baby clothes or gifts that people gave us, just in case I needed to return them. And then there was my highly entertaining 20-week ultrasound. So not surprising, I was super nervous on the way to the clinic that day. The lingering trauma from my losses made a routine and usually a very exciting ultrasound so anxiety-provoking. I got called back and I laid on the table and the tears were running out of my eyes and filling up my ears. I was totally surprised by what happened next. Rather than getting any kind of bad news, we watched a battle between a healthy, active, and very opinionated baby and the ultrasound technician. Baby refused to be near the ultrasound transponder. The problem was the baby could only run so far. And so they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth as the technician tried to catch the baby and get the pictures that we needed. And I sat there in the middle of a game of tug-of-war between a 20-week fetus and a fully grown adult with an ultrasound transponder. We didn't get any of the pictures we needed. They said come back in a little bit after the baby's bigger. We didn't get to see the baby's face, but we did get these precious pictures of the baby's feet. There was also a moment of humor and a very stressful pregnancy. And so my pregnancy carried on. We decorated the nursery. I made the baby a quilt. I did my kick counts every night like the midwife wanted me to. Every appointment, every test showed that we were meeting our milestones. After a textbook ultrasound at 34 weeks, I was maybe starting to feel more hopeful, excited, and a little less fearful. So the midwife gave us the option of having a final ultrasound at 37 weeks. I decided to go for it, just to be sure. The day of the ultrasound arrived, and it was the first time I walked in the room and was not nervous. I was finally not a nervous wreck. And so we had the ultrasound, and then they brought us back to an exam room because I had my 37-week checkup that same day. And then the midwife walked in with the on-call obstetrician. Something was wrong. I felt like the world stopped spinning when they told me the baby was in trouble. At that point, it wasn't serious enough to warrant immediate admission into the hospital. But my stillbirth risk had gone up by tenfold, and they needed to do twice weekly checks on me in the clinic, and I was going to have to be induced early. The last 2 weeks of my pregnancy were hell. I couldn't sleep. I'm pregnant out to here, and I was constantly looking for the pokes, the hiccups, and the turns of my baby. I was afraid every time they went to sleep that the worst had happened. Every appointment, the non-stress tests, the ultrasounds, I had my hospital bag with me. I didn't know if I was going to go home after the appointment. I didn't know if I was going to be induced that day, and I didn't know if I was going to be in the operating room within the hour for an emergency C-section. When I said, hey, I'll see you after school to my oldest, who's now in kindergarten, I never knew if I was telling him the truth. Then the day of my induction came. First, we started with a dose of Cytotec, and then 4 hours later, they hooked up my IV and started the Pitocin drip. For the next 8 hours, my Pitocin was increased, and we waited. We waited and waited and waited for something to happen. I joked about my IV poles, that it was my Christmas tree. My husband and I wandered around labor and delivery. We listened to music, we chatted, and we waited. And we watched the monitor, listening to the baby's heartbeat and waiting for real labor contractions to start. So after 12 hours of waiting for something to happen, something finally did happen. My water broke. A few hours and many contractions later, I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Really, it was the light of dawn. The sun was just about to rise when the midwife came in to check on my progress. She took one look, called the nurse's station, said baby was coming. It's going to be 5 minutes or less. Breathe, release. Breathe, release. The top of the baby's head was visible. My hands were shaking as I reached down. I could feel that next contraction coming. One more big breath. Okay, everyone, take this big breath with me. Can you feel that contraction building? It's time. Ready? Now, release.
Good job. Oh, what a good cry. That's a great cry.
After years of loss, of grief and pain, he was here. Jasper, my rainbow baby, was here. I caught him as he was born, and I finally held him. Jasper turned 1 a few weeks ago. And at the end of a rainbow, there's a chance to do better. So here's some wishes I have for the future. First off, let's normalize talking about pregnancy loss and giving people the space and the time and the support to grieve. I felt so alone and so ostracized in my grief that it made my healing that much more difficult. I'd like to see better grief and mental health care. Let's get better care guidelines regarding the emotional well-being of people in the throes of loss, in pregnancy after loss, and in the postpartum period. I would love to see on-staff trauma-informed therapists and crisis counselors in OB/GYN offices. No one should find out that they lost their baby and be left in a room by themselves, waiting to be squeezed into their provider schedules. Let's change the care guidelines around preconception care. Right now, the general recommendation is for women to take a multivitamin with folate. But more and more people are delaying having children into their 30s while they get their careers started. Eggs are finite and they age. Sperm quality decreases with age. How can prenatal care and also preconception care for both partners change when people are in their early 30s at the time of conception, mid-30s, or late 30s? And finally, let's support better research. We never did find out why I miscarried, and we never found out which thing we changed resulted in a healthy, happy baby. We need to have a better understanding of why miscarriage happens. Let's do more to prevent losses from happening rather than waiting to pick up the pieces or blithely saying, oh, it's just your age, usually to a woman. So you may have noticed my quilt top here in the background. So this quilt is not only a memorial for my babies, but it represents how I've changed along the way. Each of my pregnancies changed me. The waves of grief with each loss weren't just about the loss of my child and everything they could have been, but about the death and the rebirth that I went through each time. Losing my babies was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I survived. I found the courage to not only survive, but to try again. And now I can balance some of the worst moments of my life with one of the best, catching my rainbow baby. And I hope that by sharing my story, that I'll help others struggling like I did. Thank you.